More beautiful policies taking place in Ohio. Ohio prisoners are being restricted of electricity in the midst of a national heat wave that's stretching over most of the country right now. Uh, they are being restricted of electricity to their prisons because of a financial agreement that has been struck between the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction and Core Energy, a top-ranking power company located in Ohio. Since 2010, the prison system, which is a private prison system in the state of Ohio, has made over $1.3 million from money given to them by the power company in exchange for shutting off their power from 3 to 4 hours at a time between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m., which are the hottest hours of the day, mind you. Fans and lights and TV have been restricted, even as temperatures soar to record-breaking heights. Prisoner cells are not air-conditioned, and temperatures can soar to almost 90 degrees. Prisoner and human rights advocates from the ACLU and the organization CURE, C-U-R-E, are concerned that this will jeopardize not only the health and well-being of the prisoners, but also would threaten the overall safety of the prisoners as well as the staff that work in the prison system by creating agitation, frustration, anger, and tension among the prisoners. One of the many, and I consider this particular case to be one of the many examples as to how disastrous the private prison system can be, because it gives incentives for these types of cutbacks and inhumane practices that often take place in the private prison system. And Ohio has the 6th largest prison population in the country, with over 49,710 inmates currently in lockup, which is costing the state, $24,870 a year per inmate, $68 a day and that's $68 a day per inmate. Prisoners are being treated inhumanely and are basically being left to melt in their ovens.
Well, obviously, why should we care about prisoners? I mean, they must be all violent offenders, right? Except for the ones that are non-violent drug offenders. I wonder how many of them there are in the prison system.
Unfortunately, I don't have the exact numbers for Ohio with me, but I do know that most of the great majority of the prisoners in the Ohio prison system are in there.
Now you said this was this was a private prison, and we know we've seen studies before that show that these private for-profit prisons, they want people that are non-violent.
So I have 2 issues with this. When I first heard of the story, I thought it was between 2 and 6 a.m., which is still wrong, but like you don't understand, it's like you're trying to save money in the prison, and like people are sleeping, like maybe you won't even notice. But between 2 and 6 in the middle of the afternoon, that sounds like a horrible disaster. Like most of the doors in the prison open electronically and all that. If there's a riot and you're not in position to deal with the riot, then you're not going to get in position because you don't have any way of moving anything in the prison. Like this sounds like top 3 worst ideas I've ever heard.
Well, I will clarify that while the electricity is off, they are technically hooked up to a generator service, just in case they have to open the doors or close the doors. And there are some fans, meaning floor fans, that are still allowed to be used during that time period. But that's it. No air conditioning.
Well, basically anything to make it a little bit less horrible for the prisoners. They're going to shut off.
All right, so it's basically you're just basically putting them in hot boxes, right?
Yeah.
All right, but they have basically emergency. They have like basic power that they could control that. All right, so that's a different story. But I still don't like. You're still gonna aggravate people. Like if you notice, there's more violence in the heat because it's hot and you're moving around and it's still a bad idea.
When you can't get away from heat that is that extreme, it is infuriating. It will literally screw with your mind.
I have great disdain for my government. No justice, no peace. Fuck the police. I really have no love for the war on drugs. I have no love for the private prison system.
And the prison
systems
are already overcrowded, so I mean that just adds to the
it's
heat.
it is extremely draconian. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, good example. African Americans represent 13% of the population, but represent almost 60% of our prison population. It seems like it's very race-baited, but it's basically an attack on the poor and people trying to live and enjoy their vices without harming anyone else. It's gotten to a point where they're just targeting and locking up the poor. They're torturing the poor.
And I'll repeat, it costs us $24,000 per person per year. Yeah.
Well, who said that private prisons would be cheaper?
They're like
did.
hotels. They live and die in occupancy.
And with that money that we're spending on keeping people in jail, I mean, $24,000. That's enough for a living wage.
And remember, that goes right into the pockets of a private prison CEO. The guy's literally making money off torturing these inmates by shutting off electricity during a fucking heat wave.
And yeah. I gotta make one point. There's
sick.
There's no such thing as a private prison. Like, to me, a private business has customers, and your customer can't be the government because they're spending other people's money. These are corporate prisons doing governmental work. Like, I think private prisons, when people hear it, they're like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Like, you gotta sell it. You gotta call these corporate prisons because that's what they are.
And it still gets public money, though. That's that's the thing too that people don't get sold on. People don't understand about the so-called private prison industry is that they get a lot of taxpayer funding and they sign contracts with the states. And of course, these contracts involve things like the state having to promise that they will deliver a 90% occupancy rate, that they fill 90% of their beds.
I mean, there's towns where they build prisons, these private prisons or corporate prisons. I broke my own rule. They build these corporate prisons. It's bigger than it has enough beds for more people that are in the town that they build it next to. Like, who do you think's gonna fill it? Who do you think's gonna fill it? They need somebody to go in there. Like, they didn't just build the building so you could look at it.
Right. Stop and frisk and empty your pockets.
Most of them are minorities. And minorities are still getting arrested at 4 times the rate for drug offenses as white people, even though white people are, statistically, they are participating in just as much drug use as minorities, all minorities.
They're just easier to target.
Drug use is more or less even across the board, and yet black people are arrested 4 times more.
And remember, these prisons, they get around a lot of the court decisions because they're private entities. So they get more leeway from the justice system when it comes to inmate abuse complaints and all that nonsense, which should not be the case. What you are, a public business or a private business, depends on who pays you. If the government pays you, then you're public. I don't care if you're private management, you're a public company. If customers, actual humans pay you, that makes you a private company. Like, there shouldn't be different sets of standards for how you treat the inmates in these fake-ass corporate prisons than are in regular prisons.
We shouldn't have them at all. It's a bad idea having a business model based on locking people up. That's a bad business to be in. It's booming, but it's a bad business, and it's bad for the country.
And that's not to say that. And that's not even to say that private sector reforms can't help our criminal justice system. Like, the whole system of probation came from one guy who asked the judge to release inmates into his custody so he could teach them how to make boots. Like, there's a difference between, like, actually good ideas that don't cost the taxpayers money, like probation, how that came about, and building a bigger super prison for somebody else to make money off of it.
Oh, you've actually, sorry, Sean, reminded me of something else that a lot of these corporate prisons will do, and that is that they will get these people to go and work in jobs that normal people would do, right? Sanitation and whatnot. They would
Use
get
slaves.
these people, and they would, it would be, they'd pay them like 34 cents an hour. So it's sort of slave labor.
Exactly.
So you're
It's
developing
an
a slave
easy
labor
way.
force filled with nonviolent drug offenders that are mostly minority, that will do all your work for you, and then nonetheless they'll still get money from the state. This is an obvious rig.
There are more
Absolutely.
black people in prisons today than were slaves the year before the Civil War.
Yep.
That's
Like,
true.
that's insane.
That's a disturbing
Horrible.
statistic.
Horrible.
It's not just African Americans, but it's a lot of Hispanics and Caucasian. That it's basically it's the poor, pretty much.
That's true.
Mhm.
We have a serious class divide in this country, and if you're poor and you have no defense, then
It's propaganda.
for
They
you.
convinced the Nutter Butter, average granola white dude that this is okay. You're going to be a lot safer if we lock up this guy.
And by the way,
Exactly
a lot of people are still gonna think, oh, they're prisoners. Who cares about them? But look at our recidivism rate, which is one of the highest in the Western world, and compare it to countries that take care of their prisoners better, and they have some of the lowest recidivism rates. Like, all this idea that if you make a prison nice, that people will want to go back to it, that's ridiculous. Like, it's if you give them stuff in the prison to do, they could learn a trade or whatever, then they have a better chance of actually, like, not ending up back in the prison.
Right.
It benefits you, is what I'm saying.
I mean, we incarcerate more of our population than China, more than Russia, more than many
North
parts
Korea?
of more than North Korea. When you think about it, this is Russia. This is the country that invented several torture techniques, firing squads, and you're like, they're more fucking democratic than we are?